Carnival time in Rome, and Montresor schemed an act of vengeance, the Cask of Amontillado, written by Edgar Allan Poe, who born in 1809 and died in 1849. The Cask of Amontillado. Now, writer's biography. The two stories here, taken from Poe's best work, represented two types of writing in which he excelled: the Gothic tale of horror and the tale of ratiocination, that is the direct ancestor of our modern detective story. The life of unhappy genius who wrote them was in many ways as macabre and unfortunate as one of his own stories. The future poet, critic, and short story writer was born in Boston, Massachusetts, son of a pair of traveling actors, both of whom died when he was an infant. The child became the foster son of John Allan, Scottish merchant of Richmond, Virginia, and he was thereafter known as Edgar Allan Poe. The boy went abroad with Allan and spent the year 1815 to 1820 in Scottish and English schools. Returning to Richmond, Poe began writing verses. He was already a brilliant, Byronic young man, spoiled by great expectation. He went to the University of Virginia in 1826 but left after one term when his foster father refused to pay his gentlemanly gambling debts. The following year, after a quarrel with Allan, Poe left for Boston and had his first book printed, Tamerlane, which was published 18th century 27. The same year, penniless, he enlisted in the United States Army under the name of Edgar A. Perry. He was sent to garrison duty at Fort Moultrie, near Charleston, South Carolina, the scene of his story, The Gold Bug. He became regimental sergeant major in 1829 and was given an honorable discharge in order to enter West Point, where Allan had obtained an appointment for him. When Allan later disowned him, Poe deliberately neglected his duties and was dismissed in 1831. He returned to Baltimore and began getting his sketches in print in 1832. His MS found in a bottle on a $50 prize, and he obtained a place on the staff of the Southern Literary Messenger. His work was brilliant, but worry and poverty had caused him to take to drinking to starve off his growing melancholy. His foster father had died in 1834, leaving Poe not a penny. He romantically married his 14-year-old cousin, Virginia Clement, in 1836 and took her and her mother to live in New York. The year was one of the financial panic in America, and Poe was glad to move to Philadelphia, where he served as co-editor of Barton's Gentleman's Magazine for a year and literary editor of Graham's Magazine for a year and a half. These were his most productive times, but his labors were sadly underpaid, and his future was clouded by failure to finance a proposed magazine of his own, and by the knowledge that his young wife was suffering from tuberculosis. The pair returned to New York in 1844, where Poe became a freelance writer and editor of the Broadway Journal. His wife died in January 1847, and thereafter Poe's search for another wife. Reese Woodius, were his ideal now, had an element of odd comedy. On the eve of marrying an early sweetheart, Poe went to Baltimore, where he disappeared for 5 days. It is thought that an election gang of the time plied him with drink and dragged him about the city, making him vote for their candidate. He died in the hospital on October 7, 1849, a self consuming genius who first defined and demonstrated the theory of the modern short story. The Cask of Amontillado first appeared in the November 1846 issue of Goddess Lady's book. The Purloined Letter was first published in the Gift Annual for 1845. Poe's first collection of short prose writings was Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque, which was published 1840. His collection, his collected stories have frequently been reprinted in various editions. The Cask of Amontillado. The thousand injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unreaddressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit, for the most part of their enthusiasm is adapted to suit the time and opportunity. To practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gimmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack, but in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I didn't differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking mass. The man wore motley. He had on a tight fitting party strip dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you're luckily met. How remarkable well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival." "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You are not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. Amontillado! I have my doubts. Amontillado! And I must satisfy them. Amontillado! As you are engaged, I am on the way to Lucrezi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me. Lucrezi cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry. And yet some fools would have it that his state is a mass for your own. Come, let us go. Whither? To your vaults. My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Look crazy. I have no engagement. Come, my friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nectar. Let us go. Nevertheless, the cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucrezi, he cannot distinguish Sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possesses himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces two flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," he said. "It is farther on," said I. "But observe the white work which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with two filmy orbs that distilled the ream of intoxication. Later, he asked, "At length." "Later," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" "Ugh, ugh, 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 ugh." My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said decision. "We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We'll go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrece." "Enough," he said. "The cough is a mere thing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied. "And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of this medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the bird that repose around us, and I to your long life." He again took my arm and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Monteros," I replied, "were a great and numerous family. I forgot your arms." A huge human foot dove in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the hill. And the motto, "Nemo me impeni assissit." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons, with casks and pensions intermingling, into the inmost recesses of catamombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The nectar," I said, "see, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the boards. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we'll go back ere it is too late. Your cough, it is nothing," he said. "Let us go on. But first, another draught of the medoc." I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I didn't understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood?" "How? You are not of the Masons?" Yes, I said, yes. "You? Impossible. A Mason?" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said, "a sign." "It is this," I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces, "but let us proceed the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arcs, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambox rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less space. Its walls had been lined with human remains piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. Three sides of these interior crypts were still ornamented in this manner. From the fourth side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about our 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use within itself, but formed merely the interval between two of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and asked and was backed by one of their circumscribed walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light didn't enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucrezi, he is an ignoramus," interrupted by my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidity, bewildered. A moment more and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were two iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet, horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nature." "Indeed, it is very damp. Once more let me implore you to return." "No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado," ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied. "The Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken, throwing them aside. I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low mourning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth. and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which that I might hearken to it with the more satisfactions. I seized my levers and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruptions the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tire. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and the holding the flambeaux over the masonwork threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the wreckage, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the eighth, the ninth, and the 10th tire. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the knees a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the novel Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha ha ha, hey, 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 a very good joke. Indeed, an excellent jest. We shall have many a wreath laugh about it at the plaza. For our win, ha ha ha. The Amontillado, I said. Yes, Amontillado, but is it not getting late? Will not they be outing us at the plaza? The Lady Fortunato and the rest. Let us begone. Yes, I said, let us begone. For the love of God. Montreasure. Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato? No answer. I called again, Fortunato? No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In peace, Request cat. The end.